Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Kavchet. We begin a new parak, Cheskas Sabatim, third parak of Batra. It is a very long parak. It's over a 30 daf. Although, if you flip ahead, you will see that the actual size of the amount of words on each page, well, Gemara words, is relatively small. Because starting with tomorrow's daf, at least we're going to switch from Rashi's commentary to the Rashbam's, and Rashbam is much wordier. The basic focus of this parak is about chazaka. Chazaka is a word that means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. But here it means that if somebody is present on land for 3 years, then it is not that entitles them, gives them ownership of the land. It's not like some squatter's right, but it serves as evidence that they are the owners of the land. And if they make a legitimate claim, they say they purchased it or something of that nature, they can't just say, oh, well, nobody ever complained, so it's mine. But as we're going to see, an important principle the Gemara is going to introduce right at the beginning is kol chazaka she'eni matana eina chazaka. If you just have been on the land for 3 years and you're not giving any reason to say why it's legally yours, then then the chazaka is meaningless. But if you have a claim, I bought it or something of that nature, then even if you can't bring any other evidence, the fact that you've been on it for 3 years and nobody has challenged your presence and your using of it, that gives you a presumption of owner. That serves as evidence of ownership. Okay. Of course, part of the question you want to ask is, well, where were the original owners? If were the original owners in China, they had no idea that you were there, and how could they have registered a complaint or so on? And what were you doing that maybe was sufficient provocation for them to have to respond and issue a complaint? So all of those are things that we are going to discuss, but that is the basic principle, that being there for 3 years, making use of it serves, and the owner's lack of response serves as evidence that you are the legitimate owner. But it has to be backed by a claim, or maybe said better, that serves as backing to a claim of legitimate ownership. And that's really going to be the major focus for this entire parak. Let's take a look at the opening Mishnah. So, Cheskas Habatim v'Habarot v'Hashichin v'Hame'arot. So the chazaka for houses or for cisterns and canals and other types of caves, basically other types of things that hold water. Shovachot or pigeon coats, dove coats. And bathhouses, ubeit havadin and olive presses, ubeit hashlachin and irrigated fields, the havadim and slaves. The koshu, all of these things are land. I mean, except for the slaves, which are not themselves land, but halachically are treated as land. So far, that's another important thing, that this idea relates to real estate, land property, as well as slaves. For koshu who osa peirot tadir, anything that regularly produces fruit, that is something that you would have regular benefit from. So cheskatan shalosh shanim miyom liyom, is 3 years from day to day. So the first point of the Mishnah, as you can tell by the list of all these different types of property, is not to, as with most times when we start a new topic, where the Gemara normally, or the Rabbi in the Mishnah normally does not do the job of first saying, let me tell you the basic principle that's operative here, and let's lay down the foundation, and then let's talk about some more general applications, and then more exceptions. No, usually it starts with some presumption that you know the basic assumptions, and it goes into a more interesting case. Okay, so here it's not that far afield. It doesn't go to some very bizarre case, but it does start by categorizing, not by telling you what the basic rule is, but by categorizing different types of property, and by telling you that how long of a duration is chazaka. We speak about 3 years, okay, but that only applies to something that is something that you use on a regular, ongoing basis. A home is the best example. You live in a home on a daily basis. It doesn't mean you're in there every single day, right? And that also raises interesting points. Like if I say I was a chazaka, I was in this apartment for 3 years. Well, what if you were on a 1 month vacation, in France? Does that count to interrupt your chazaka? So that's something we can worry about, okay? But the basic point is 3 years is measured from, I started here on, January 1st, and 3 years later, December 31st, nobody ever said anything. So it has to be continuous, because the benefit you get from an apartment and from a house is continuous, is not seasonal. And that's really true by all of these. Wells are used regularly, pigeon cotes are type of a business, bathhouses, presumably.
So this Mara is to store like.
I guess so.
What about the irrigated field?
So the irrigated field, the assumption here is that because it's by irrigation, it's something that is not as seasonal. Now, I don't necessarily mean that you harvest it on a ongoing basis, but it's sort of something, as opposed to fields, like in the winter, the whole field is fallow, there's, it's less seasonal. So for example, if you look at Rashi, right? Rashi says, where's Rashi?
Where's Rashi?
Yeah. Beis hashlachin mitosh hamayan betocho shemashnos mimenu tadir osepero tadir. So actually, Rashi says it does produce on a regular basis, because actually one of the things, and there's a big Tosfos tries to figure this out, that it might not actually be enough that you're working it, because if all you're doing on the field is not benefiting from it, if all you're doing on the field is you are, irrigating it and plowing it and planting it, then I could say, I wasn't going to say anything. Guy wants to come into my field and start irrigating it. Be my guest. So the question is, okay, but let's say it's a cycle that ends with you harvesting it. So that case, the fact that you were irrigating it and whatever, plowing it beforehand counts towards the chazaka, because it ends with you showing mastery that you're going to take it. If all you did was to, irrigate it and then you walked away, you can't say, oh, look, here's my chazaka, I irrigated it. Okay, but the assumption anyway here is that this type of a thing is something that it produces on a more ongoing basis, and therefore that actually creates a higher demand. That means that you have to show a sense that you were using it for 3 years, means you got the full benefit out of it for those 3 years. Okay, so that's a chazaka to take possession. That is not, so that is a good point, but that's the exact opposite or close to the opposite. Meaning when we talk, like I said, chazaka is a word that means many different things in different contexts. Chazaka, if we're actually doing the act of taking possession, I'm buying this land from you and I have to do some act that shows mastery, actually there, it's actually do the opposite. I do something to improve the land. It's the basic act of what a chazaka is, okay? But that is what you could ask, like, why is that? Why can't, chazaka be also taking benefit from the land? But here, anyway, it's not about an act of kinyan that takes possession. It's an act that shows if I was not here legitimately, the owners should have said something. So the basic point of these first thing is something that regularly produces. So for 3 years of something that you're getting ongoing benefit means that you're there for an ongoing way for 3 years, okay? Now Tosfos is a little interesting, because Tosfos also talks about, right, presumably there still could be some seasonal aspect to it. If you look at Tosfos, Cheskas Abadim Beis Abadim, so one of the things is these olive presses. So Tosfos says, Pirish Ri Bar Mordechai, Dadnan Per Chomer B'Kodesh, Avru Hagitot Rabadim, Mashma Sheyesh Lehem Zman Kavua. So it says, when the time of the wine and the olive press is over, so it sounds like that those are seasonal. And here it says that an olive press is ongoing. That's because most people do the pressing at the time when the stuff is gathered. There are people that use it, slowly over time. Now, it's exactly not clear what that means.
Therefore, there's the majority.
Well, does that mean that if you're doing it as a private enterprise, and most people do it only one time in the year, then maybe it doesn't fall into this Mishnah. But if you're doing it as a business, right, then that might mean that there's a high season and there's a low season, but there's still the low season when you're still open for business. You just get less business during that time. But obviously, all these things raise these types of questions, right? How do you measure all of this stuff precisely? Anyway, let's take a look. So that's the first point of the Mishnah. But if it's a sadeh habal, if it is a field that survives by rain, okay, cheskata shalosh shanim ve'enam yom liyom. It's 3 years, but it's not ongoing because there are specific seasons. So you can get 3 seasons out of a field without being there, for a 3 full calendar years. Now, how do you measure those 3 seasons? So Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Gimel Chadashim B'Rishona, Gimel B'Achrona, V'Shnei Masar Chodesh Be'emtza. 3 at the beginning, the entire 12 middle months, and 3 at the end. So right, it's a year and a half. So what are the 3 at the beginning? So Rashi says it is the 3 months, prior to the beginning of the year. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, where's Rashi? It just says the last 3 months. Yeah, so Tosfos has a whole question whether that means the 3 months before Nisan or the 3 months also before Tishrei. Okay, I think is Rashi clear about that? Hold on. No, he doesn't say.
Oh, he says Amarin is early for Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, really, Rosh Hashanah. Right. So, okay, so the planting season starts at Rosh Hashanah, right? That's why, by the way, one of the reasons Tishrei is considered the beginning of the year, even though Nisan is the beginning of the months, is because from an agricultural perspective, it's also why school's year starts in September, right? Because we used to be more agriculture-based society. And from an agricultural perspective, the planting season starts in the beginning of the fall. Okay, so you plant, you plow, the land is soft, soft or whatever, and then actually the seeds stay protected over the winter, and then come the spring, and then they sprout forth, and then you harvest, and then the summer you dry it out, and so on, and that's basically the planting season. So Rashi says that you might get in a quick type of a crop, some crop that ripens very quickly. You get it in the summer, and then you have, so that's 1 year, and then you get the 12 months in the middle, and then you get some 3 months, some fast type of a crop at the end. Now, Tosfos has a whole discussion. One of these big Tosfos is you have to actually harvest the crop, or can you actually do some planting without the harvesting? That's the question about, somebody could say, I'm not going to complain if you're just going to be planting. So if you look at Rashi says the last 3 months, at the end of this Rashi, right before Rabbi Akiva, I don't know where to exactly tell you it is. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, about 12 lines before the lines get wide, like right in the middle of the narrow lines of Rashi. Line starts with the word chadashim. He says, "V'yeshlo edim shezar bos and gimel chadashim v'chein begimel chadashim rishonim shel achrona harezu chazkat shlosh shanim mitzufot she'ein lechadam haroz chaver shezoreya et sadeu lechol pri ha'asui l'shana v'shotek." So Rashi says the last 3 months actually is you just did the planting in the last 3 months, in the last 3 Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, but that's a chazaka because the way you're there in the land basically makes it clear that you're intending to also harvest it. Okay, now Tosfos sort of takes objection because Tosfos says, if you have not actually harvested it in the end, somebody could say, I'm not going to complain about a planting that didn't end with a harvesting. You planted and you walk out. I'm not going to complain yet, right? So I'm just going to step in and I'll take the harvesting that you did for me.
Yeah, what about the year in between?
I understand. What do you mean the year? Okay, but I have to not object for 3 years. I have to have 3 years of provocation, and the last year wasn't provocation. Now, what Rashi could say back is, if the last year followed 2 years of planting and harvesting, then that gives the context for the third year, and you should have. So I'm just pointing out that one of the questions going on here is that Tosfos raises is, right, what does presence mean? What are you doing in the field? And it has to be some type of harvesting, which Rashi is sensitive to, but he says, well, that's clear enough from the end. Okay, yes.
I'm just confused about the year in between. Are we going to talk about that? Like, I don't know.
Why it needs to be a full 12-month calendar year?
Yeah, I thought we set it up as this is the type of field where you're not doing something during part of the year. So what's going
right,
on?
but you're sort of, well, you don't have to be working during those like winter months, but okay,
why is it different?
you mean why is it 3 months enough at the end and 3 months at the beginning and you can't have 3 months in the middle?
Yeah.
Right.
The point is that why is it a full 12-month period in the middle? Meaning a 12-month period is a full year. So that implies that you didn't do anything on the field in that year, right? And so
meaning what you did in that middle 12 months is you planted for 3 months, you let the sort of it stayed underground for 3 months of the winter, then you harvested for 3 months in the spring. And then for the 3 months you left. That's
where did you get the 3 months in the spring?
The way a normal agricultural year works.
Yes.
Okay,
normal.
Right. A normal. Now the question you're asking is if you can make do. Look, you all get. Let's assume, Jenna. Let's assume for a moment, right, that we didn't introduce the idea of 3 months at the beginning, 3 months in the end. You understand that I would say that a normal type of a field, right, being on in a year means you do what the normal cycle is. You plant for 3 months. Okay, for the winter you're not doing anything. There's nothing to do, right? But then you have to be there during the spring and you have to be harvesting, and maybe you even have to be there in the summer and let the stuff dry out in the fields, which is what they did in the fields. And you have to show that you're using it the way it's normally used over the course of a normal cycle of a year. That makes sense, right? So the only question then becomes like, okay, but then why don't I have to do that for 3 years, right? Why is this enough? And it's true that the sense here is the sense is that because it's, I don't know how to explain this exactly, because it's like seasonal, there's a way of explaining that it doesn't really explain the last 3 months, but there's a way of explaining that the first 3 months, if I did some type of a thing that had a very short season, then I actually use that thing for I did want to, let's read the end of the Mishnah. Maybe it'll get a little clearer, maybe not. Maybe I'm not so clear in my own head about this. But let's try to read the end. Hold on to your questions. I want to read the end of the Mishnah because it might or may not clarify it. But anyway, it'll give us more data. So I'll come back to you, I promise. Let's read the end of the Mishnah, okay? So the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Gimel Chodashim B'Rishon v'Gimel B'Achronav Shneimosar B'Emsa Harei Yud Chet Chodesh. Rabbi Kiva Omer Chodesh B'Rishon v'Chodesh B'Achronav Yud Bet B'Emsa Harei Yud Dalet Chodesh. Now, our Rabbi Shmuel now clarifies the 18 months. Rabbi Akiva even had 14 months. But Medvar B'Stei Lavan. When is that true? That's about a wheat field. Okay, it's white because you look at it; it's all white when it's growing. Aval B'Stei Ilan, if it's a tree, if it's an orchard, if they're trees, or which also includes not just trees but also vines and so on. So Koni says Tuato. Umeisiket Zetav. So Tuato, grain here. The Rashi and Tosfos based on the Gemara say this actually means your grapes. So you gather in your grapes. You gather in your olives. Meisik is just the verb used for olives. You gather in your olives. Kaneses kaitzo. You gather in your figs that are drying out in the field. That counts for 3 years because you basically did 3 types of harvesting of 3 different plants, and that counts as 3 years.
I'm sorry, this is all one field?
It's an orchard that has different types of, things growing from it. Okay, so, but you're right. Well, you say, well, this is a chazaka for this section. This is a chazaka for this section. So it's clear. So what's clear here by the end, right, is that you don't need even 3 calendar years. All of this could take place within 1 year, right? But it's some idea of like 3 types of harvests, right? That becomes clear at the end. So how to deal with this idea in the middle, which your question, I think, essentially is that if you really do need is 3 harvests, why do you need the 12 months in the middle? Why don't you do 3 months and get some quick type of a thing there, and then 3 months and 3 months, assuming that works in terms of the seasons, right? So I don't really know. I would say that the sense is that there are, that there's like 3 concepts that are going on here, which is, one is the straight 3 calendar years, Yom Liyom. The other is something that sort of represents 3 years. So, for example, sometimes there's an idea which is like Yom Echad B'Chodesh counts as a Chodesh, Chodesh Echad B'Shana counts as a Shana. So the stuff in the middle sounds like what we're talking about is it doesn't have to literally be 3 years, Miyom Liyom. It has to sort of represent 3 years. So obviously you need the anchor in the middle, but then a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. The beginning counts to represent a year, the end counts to represent a year, and the middle is a full year. But we're not directly looking at, harvests. We're looking at something that is a virtual 3 years, as opposed to a literal 3 years. And then by the end, we're looking at a case of 3 harvests. Okay, so that's sort of what we're dealing with. Exactly how to explain. I mean, I know it's bothering you, which is like, I still don't get the logic of the middle idea. I get the logic of the beginning, it's 3 literal years. I get the logic at the end, that it's 3 harvests, okay? But like, what's exactly with the middle? Why does it count like a month at the beginning and a month at the end? Why do you need the full 12 months in the middle? That's basically what you were asking, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, how are we measuring it? If we're measuring it by doing the one full thing that only takes 3 months, then great. And if we're measuring it by a year, then right.
Right. There's somehow some idea that you need 3 calendar years, but it can be like an approximate 3 years, a virtual 3 years.
Which
so you need
for the 3 different produces. That's like pretty weird too.
Right, but that's like a different idea altogether. That's like 3 harvests. Right. The middle idea is like 3 years, but not literal. 3 years, but approximate. Then you somehow get it by the year in the middle and the little at the beginning and the little at the end. But why exactly that works for like an irrigated field? What's the logic also of the correlation of those two is also not exactly clear. David, you had a question?
Yeah. Well, just a question on the end first is, how in the world would you know that tuaso means grapes? I mean,
you'd be Rashi and Tosfos, and I assume the Gemara is going to say it. I have to double check the Gemara. Otherwise, you would definitely not know it. Okay. But also because it said State Ilan, and Trua, you don't have it as State Ilan. That's a State Lavan.
Right.
Yeah, but you had a question before that, David.
Yeah. I guess the question was, is So what we're saying is not that the 12 months is a 12-month gap, but the 12 months is additional.
Oh, it's part of the 12 months. Oh, yeah, if that wasn't clear. Yeah, the 12 months is a normal 12-month cycle of planting and harvesting.
Correct.
And so on.
Now I understand.
Okay, yeah.
I'm still not understanding why you need a whole 3 year. Who would let somebody be on their field and harvest their own crops if it's theirs? Just one harvest should be enough for the whole thing. In other words, or say, okay, if he wasn't there, then
Right,
say that, then make
fine.
that chiluk. If he wasn't there, then he gets a longer time.
All right,
Was
so
there.
fine. So we'll see that in the Gemara. But obviously, the point is that it's not enough that there was provocation. It's how much lack of responding to provocation serves as real evidence. It serves enough to substitute for the presence of real documentation. Okay,
So
so
I see someone taking my produce.
okay,
I
maybe.
didn't say anything.
Yeah,
I like to take my own
who knows?
You can imagine that someone has a field that's fallow, and then somebody else comes and starts working it. You're not necessarily.
Okay, so then say a year.
Exactly.
So-
And I'll get around to it. I'll sue you, whatever. They're witnesses.
Okay, so a year. So
Okay, maybe 5 years, whatever. So we'll see in the Gemara. All right. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Anyway, thankfully, so yes, it is complicated, particularly this middle opinion about what does it mean to have 3 virtual years, and why that specifically is for Sdebal, even if Sdebal is more regular, exactly how that works conceptually. We'll definitely have to return to that. But anyway, thankfully, the Gemara starts us off at the most conceptual basis and says, what is this idea of chazaka? Where does it come from? Before we get to worrying about these different types of fields. So let's take a look. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shamat mihochei Usha. I heard from those that went to Usha. Usha was where the Sanhedrin was after it left Yavne. Okay, so and Rabbi Yochanan is a very early Amora.
So Holchei Usha, what, the Sanhedrin?
Yeah, the Sanhedrin, the people from the Sanhedrin, yeah. So
That's a weird way of referring to them.
What? I don't think he means the Sanhedrin. I think he means from people who came from Usha. Like, he doesn't mean I heard from the Sanhedrin directly. Okay? They used to say, how do you know the idea that a chazaka is for 3 years? Mishur hamuad, from a shur hamuad, from an ox that is a habitual gorer. This is Yerushalmi says the same thing. Ma'ashur hamuad, kivan shenagach gimel gikhot. This is an idea of chazaka, which is 3 times establishes a pattern. Okay, so if an ox scores for 3 times, we no longer say that its goring is irregular. We now say that it's a habitual gorer. It no longer has a status of a tam. It has a status of a muad, of a habitual gorer. Hachanami, so here too, kivan the achot plus shanim. Once you're eating in the field for 3 years, it leaves the possession of the seller, of the original owner, and is established as in your possession. Now, what the heck does this mean? First of all, if you understood chazaka as only an idea of establishing a pattern of behavior, so we could say, okay, you've been on that field for 3 years. We've now established a pattern of behavior that you are a regular harvester and user of the field. Maybe you're a regular gosling, right? So even if you just think about the comparison, the analogy, without even asking the logic, it's not enough to say you are habitual. That's not just the idea of a pattern of behavior. What the point here is also that it's a status issue. The label we attach to this shore is tam. After 3 times, we shift its label. Its identity shifts. Okay, so you now have been acting as the owner for 3 years. Okay, after you've been acting as the owner, because that's what an owner does. I mean, it's also a sharecropper does it. It's true, but anyway, a sharecropper would then share his crop. Would pay. You haven't been sharing your crop. You've been taking the whole thing. So you've been acting as an owner for 3 years. After that, now your status has changed. Now you switched from being a squatter to an owner. It's a status change. Now that's all very nice, but why is that legal? Like, the logic for the shor hamuad is because we want to know whether it's going to likely gore or not gore. Why does this give you rights which you're not entitled to? So, but it seems like the Gemara is dealing on some pure formalism. It's almost like squatters' rights, right? Where we always go to the effort to tell people when you learn chazaka, it's not like just because you're there, you have rights to it. It sounds like Hochei Ush are actually saying otherwise. They're basically saying, you're there, nobody complained, that makes it yours. You've exerted your dominance over it, that gives it to you. Okay, now Tosfos, of course, and Rashi and Tosfos try to make this into the more normal idea that no. What it means is nobody's objecting for 3 years. It shows that they were okay, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what the way the Gemara sounds like. Tosos, what?
And you're claiming that you acquired it.
And you're claiming that you acquired, but at this stage, that's not what the Gemara sounds like. And Tosos actually, in one opinion, acknowledges that this seems to be just some formal rule that you're entitled to it, even if you didn't buy it like legally. If you look at the last line of Tosos, Ima Shor Hamuad, Tosos says, where is it? No, the last line of the last of Ad Negicha Revi'it. That Tosfos, 2 lines from the bottom. Tosfos says, "Va'omeri the salkadaitich de'hamakshe the hachi yalif ma'as mikinagach gimel pamim nafkikle michatzi nezek lenezek shalem." Same way, when you gore 3 times, you no longer pay half damages; you pay full damages. Hachanami kimin she'achla shalosh shanim v'lo micha. Okay, no reason. Okay, but that's just the thing. Your status changes. You change the status. You're no longer a squatter. You're now an owner. That's actually what the Gemara sounds like. Of course, the Gemara is going to push back because that's not fair and that's not logical, but that's at least the initial sense.
What is it saying that you're the owner, or that the burden of proof switches?
That doesn't sound like that. I mean, you could say that, but no, because then what would the person prove? How could you prove I didn't sell it to you? It sounds like, no, you're the owner. That gives you rights.
Yeah,
okay, let's read a little more. The Gemara says like this. So that's the argument. It's like a sharmut. Obviously, you understand the attraction of that 3 and 3, and 3 makes chazaka, 3 establishes a pattern. So that's obviously the attraction of making that comparison.
So Ush is Amoraim. It's already a
well, Rabbi Yochanan is like a first generation of Tanoim of Amoraim.
Very interesting.
I know, but Usha. I mean, it's also funny because Usha was still early on. It was
that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what Holchei Usha means. Anyway. Yeah, but the Sanhedrin left Usha. The Sanhedrin, by Rabbi Yochanan's time, the Sanhedrin was no longer. I mean, had been, I think, no longer in Usha for more than a generation by Rabbi Yochanan's time.
Went to Tveria.
What? I know. So I'm just saying, but the Golos to Usha was many generations before Rabbi Yochanan. What? Oh, you mean Holchei Miusha? You mean from? So why is he? Why didn't he say Holchei Yavne? I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure. Let's move on. Anyway, it says like this. Okay. Maybe it just means they're reporting there was a Masorah going back to Usha. That could make more sense too. You know, that I heard from some tradition going back to Usha. Okay. The Ritva says that, a tradition going back to Usha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, so the Gemara says like this. Say 1 minute. Ashur Amuad doesn't pay full damages. 3 times it becomes a muad, but it doesn't pay until it gores the 4th time. So here too, maybe you have to live in it the 4th year. Now, of course, that's a little crazy question. Its status changes after 3 times, and the consequence occurs when it gores the 4th time, because now there's a new payment to be made. So here too, the consequence should begin the beginning of the 4th year. Now it's mine. Anyway, let's see what the Gemara's answer is. Which is essentially the Gemara's answer. What type of a comparison is that? After 3 times, now it's a muad. The idach kilo nagach my mishalem, and if it doesn't do anything, okay, you got a muad ox that has nothing to pay for because it didn't do anything. That there's a consequence to its status. Once it eats for 3 years, kind of say now the status changes. It's now yours. So now the Gemara asks a question which shows that the Gemara really thought that this did it all by itself. It just made it yours because of your demonstrating your ownership. Because now the Gemara says, Elameata, if we want to take that comparison seriously, chazaka sheni matana, to have a chazaka, you shouldn't need to make a claim that you bought it. You should just say, why is it mine? I was here 3 years. Nobody complained. That makes it mine. 3 years, it establishes it me as the owner. So then you should not. So why is it true that if there's no taina, it's not good? Why do we teach in a Mishnah? Any chazaka does not have a claim to back it up. Ain't a chazaka. It's not that good. So clearly, chazaka does not by itself change the status.
Wait. The taina here is the guy who's being machzik is claiming.
Yes,
or the owner is being.
No, that's called the mecha. Tana is, here's my claim why I'm a legitimate owner.
So
I bought it from you. You donated it to me. Yes, there is a claim being made in court which the chazaka serves to back up. The chazaka by itself does not make it mine. the chazaka backs up a claim of legitimate ownership.
Well, I'm sorry. Every time I ask, I'm not going proclaiming that it's mine.
No,
what I'm usually doing.
No, I show up after 3 years. Michael, what have you been doing on my field? If you say, well, you didn't say anything to me, and I've been here 3 years, it's mine. That's chazaka sheni matayin. If you say, what do you mean? What am I doing here? I bought it from you 3 years ago. You gave it to me 3 years ago. Okay, I won it in a poker game from you 3 years ago. That's a tana.
That's only if you're ma'arer, but let's say if you're not ma'arer.
Well, if you're not ma'arer, nobody's doing anything.
On my land?
I mean,
what? That's the error. What are you doing on my land?
Yeah, right. But if nobody's complaining, then everybody's going along with their lives. Okay, the need to produce a chazaka is that the ownership is being challenged. Okay, and if the ownership is being challenged, then saying that I have a chazaka does not make.
But if
me
it's
win.
10 years, then I can just say I've always been here.
You can be here 100 years. If I prove that I owned it first and you came after me, then either you need a star or you need a chazaka. Anything short of a star or a chazaka, the principle, maybe there's a good point to say an important concept here. No, here's an important point to make a very important concept that's going to sort of, play out for the whole rest of the parak, which is, as opposed to metaltalin, by metaltalin, the halacha is, chazaka mashetach tziyadam hareyu shelo. Ownership is possession is a presumption of ownership. Like possession is 9/10 of the law. So basically, I can show that I was driving around in my nice Ferrari yesterday, and I've been, talking about it for the last year about how I love it. I would never sell it for $1 million. And Michael now is driving around with it with the keys, and I say, Michael, what did you do? You stole my car. I left it parked in the parking lot with the keys, and you took it. He said, no, you sold it to me. And since he's in possession of it, I have the burden of proof. Okay, that's by metaltalin. Doesn't matter how much it was known to be mine and how much I've been proclaiming I would never sell it. If you're in possession of it, you're presumed the owner. I have the burden of proof.
But you still need to claim. He still needs to claim.
Right.
You still need to claim. Okay, but I'm just saying, possession is a presumption of ownership with a claim of legitimate. Karka is the opposite. Karka, the principle is, because there's no sense of really having it in your pocket and possessing it. So the sense is cheskas mara kama. No, it's presumed to be owned by the person who we know was the last legitimate owner. I mean, you could always say, how does that start? But okay, we can't figure that out. Whatever. We live in society. We start with presumptions. Whoever the presumption was of the last legitimate owner is the presumption of the current owner. I was the last known legitimate owner of this land. Michael's been on it for 20 years, for 50 years. And I say, Michael, what the heck have you been doing on my land for 50 years? If there were not a halacha of this parak of chazaka, he would not be believed unless he could produce a star. In the absence of documentation, the fact that I was known, now, or witnesses that saw me sell it to him. But since I was known as the last owner, I am presumed as still the current owner unless he can produce direct testimony that I sold it to him, or a star, which is like sort of direct testimony, or chazaka. Okay, and that's the way that chazaka with a taina, and all of those things are with a taina. He says, "Here's how I came in legitimate legal possession of it." But if all he says is, "I know it was yours, but since you didn't complain, it became mine because I was on it," that's chazaka she'eni matana, and that's what this says. If it was really based on shor hamuad, we'd say, "Okay, you were on it, you get it." But no, but it really does not work that way.
So this only works for 3 years plus. What you're saying?
What do you mean plus? Plus a taina.
No, 3 years or 10 years or 50 years.
Yeah, of course.
3 years or not.
Of course. Yeah, there's no higher limit.
There's no like it doesn't expire.
Correct. Yes.
But on the top line, you said, how could you prove that you didn't sell it to me? So if I'm driving your Ferrari, how could you prove that you didn't sell it to me?
What?
I mean, in other words, so the presumption is how could you rebut the presumption?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, you can never accuse someone of theft without witnesses.
Right, without witnesses of theft. Now there are a subcategory of metaltalin, which are things that are sort of like if I have sheep, things that generally change hands, or dvar masim lahaskir lahashil, things that generally rent out. So there, your possession is sheep king hens in the sense that that they wander around or whatever. Okay, but things that are not in a category of things you normally rent out and so on, then yeah, you're in trouble. If you're going to give him your Ferrari, lend him your Ferrari, you better have witnesses that you lent it to him. And don't leave your keys in your car.
Or you keep the star that.
No, keeping the star doesn't mean anything because there's no star by the metaltalin. I could hold on to the star. I could sell it to you. You gave me we met in the parking lot. You gave me a briefcase full of $100,000. You did a kinyan on it. You don't need the whole idea of having a deed
to a. I'm saying, but if you had a rental contract.
Oh, a rental contract.
That's what I
yes.
meant.
Yes.
You have a rental
right. A rental contract.
You give it. A car is a poor example because you have a star. You have the vehicle registration.
But that would not. That's not meaningful according to halacha. I mean,
That's
now
not
the question
right.
is how much
That
Dina de
should be a
Mafuso would change
Yeah,
those
that-
assumptions.
Even without Dina
Fine,
Mafuso, that
just
should
as
be a raya.
circumstantial evidence, right? That's true. Okay, but I was trying to give a nice, colorful example. Yes, I keep on dropping these hints. I wonder one of the times my birthday will roll around. We'll pick up on the hints. Yes, yes.
If you need a claim, what's the purpose of the hazaka? What's the purpose of
Because you don't need to produce a star. You don't need the physical documentation.
What do you need? What's the claim then?
I bought it from you.
Right.
I don't have the star, the document, but I've been on it 3 years. That proves it's mine.
So does somebody
The chazaka replaces the need for testimony or star.
You don't
Okay.
have to go to court.
You do have to go to court.
Okay.
I mean,
Swear.
Well,
You're saying testimony. You mean a witness.
what?
Then when you say
Michael's going to have to produce witnesses that he was on it for 3 years. You still need witnesses, okay? Because then it's just a he said, she said type of a thing, whatever. But he's not going to have to produce witnesses that saw me sell it to him, okay? Yes.
That was a terrible example you just gave. Ferrari started 188,400.
Sorry, okay, with you.
Go to 400.
Right. Okay, moving on. All right, so now, all right, Chevra, exactly. The Idach, okay, so the Gemara says, if really being on it itself created ownership, and then you wouldn't need to have a claim that you purchased it. Why do we teach in the Mishnah? So clearly it's not just being on it makes you the owner. The Gemara says, now the Gemara gets to what the real reasons are. And then whether the ox still is relevant or not, we'll see. No. So here's the answer. Why is it that if there's no Tana, you don't win it? Because right, because I'm sorry. The reason is because we say that if you're on it for 3 years, it's yours, because that's what you're claiming. You're claiming that it's yours. Maybe it is like you said it's yours. If you're not going to make a claim that it's yours, why would we make that claim for you? Now that's still interesting, right? The Gemara still does not want to give up this idea of the shore. Like the classic explanation of why you need a Tana is because like property doesn't change hands without some legitimate transaction, right? But then the idea of what we're learning from the Shor HaNiskal seems less relevant, because how does the idea of I'm not sure this like the Shor HaMuad, how does the Shor HaMuad all of a sudden make it yours? So what it's still the Gemara sort of seems to be saying is, it really is the idea that being there 3 years makes it yours, but you have to frame the meaning of why are you there 3 years, right? You could be 3 years as a sharecropper. You could be 3 years because you were hired by the owner. So a 3 years that is framed in the way that sort of says it's a 3 years of ownership, then that creates that establishes you as owners. When it's not being framed that way, it doesn't. So if you're not framing it, if you're not, sort of positioning yourself as an owner, we're not going to position you as an owner. But the Gemara is still not really using this as the normal explanation, which is the psychological point that if he's not complaining and he's not objecting, it shows he must have stolen it to you. Because then the comparison to Shor HaNiskal is irrelevant. It really still wants to use Shor HaNiskal, I keep on saying Shor HaNiskal, Shor HaMuad, right, as somehow showing 3 times establishes identity, changes status. Oh, you need a taina? That's just to give a meaning to the presence. But fundamentally, it's not a substitute proof and an explanation. It's not evidence in a court. It's about change of status. But the claim frames what the meaning of that presence is. Okay? That seems to be the point of the Gemara.
This might be silly, but someone's got to name that shore as Muad.
Well, you need a process and based it.
Yeah.
So-
So that might make this a little closer.
So we're going to get to
See what
that.
I'm saying?
Yeah. So we're going to get to that a little bit right now. So
Okay.
Maskivler of Rav Avira, Elamiat, if that's true, if somebody objects to your being there, not in the presence of the owner, then not in your presence. Michael's on my land, and I'm away in France, and I objected. So that shouldn't be meaningful, and that shouldn't now because normally if I object during the 3 years, it stops his possession. And even we're going to learn even an objection not in his presence. Now that should not work. Why should that not work? Dunya deshur hamuad. The same way that's true by this ox. Mashur amuad b'fan of be'inan. When you testify against a guy's goring ox, you have to do it in the guy's presence. And here too, it should have to be in the guy's presence if we really mean to be serious about this comparison.
Oh.
Now, of course, well, let's read the answer, but then point out that that's not a good analogy. Anyway, the Gemara says, No. There, it's a pasuk. It says you warn the owners. The owners have to be present. You're giving testimony against somebody. They need to be present in court in order to, defend themselves. Your friend has a friend. And your friend's friend has a friend, and the word gets around, which is the general explanation the Gemara has, that you can object not in somebody's presence, and eventually, right, now we just friend everybody by Facebook, and that's, and you have shared friends. That's chaver islay, right? No, right? Exactly. That's how you can do it shalom b'fanav. You know how Facebook recommends friends? You and this person have so many friends in common. That's chaver islay. And so that's how you also do a chumach shalom b'fanav. But anyway, the Gemara's basic explanation is you can do it in France, and eventually the word will get to the other person. Now, that's all very nice, but what the heck is the comparison? Micha interferes with establishing the chazaka, right? So creating the chazaka is I warn the owner, I warn Jenna 3 times in her presence, and I say, your shore is goring. So doing it directly in front of Jenna is a way of creating that status. Here, the Gemara should say, it shouldn't be asking that mechash out of the presence shouldn't work. It should be asking that chazaka out of somebody's presence should not work. If I want to change the status of this field from your field to my field, then the same way I want to change the status of your ox, I need to do it in your presence. If I want to change the status of your field, I need to be taking possession in your presence in order to now change its status. So Tosfos basically says that's what the Gemara means. I'm going to embrace Tosfos. I don't know if it is pshat, but it's the logical pshat. He says chazaka means something because it's a taking of possession in the absence of objection. So what creates the chazaka, the same way by the ox, what creates the status is the warning. Well, it's the goring followed by the warning of the owner. What takes what works by chazaka is. Yeah, but with it 3 times. What takes place by the chazaka is the taking of possession, followed by, like the goring is followed by the warning, the taking of possession followed by the silence, followed by the non-reaction, the non-mecha. That's part of what establishes my presence. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is that non-mecha should have to happen as it essentially in the original owner's presence, right? So if the owner's in France, if I'm in France and Michael is doing it, it's not an imecha b'fanav, right? It's the provocation and my silence or whatever, it's not happening, I'm not directly encountering it, so it should not be strong enough to change the status of it, okay? So it's like if Jenna's cow gored, not in her presence, or she was warned not in her presence, it's not powerful enough to change the status. So if Michael is taking possession not in my presence, and I'm not being confronted with it and being silent, and that's not happening, as it were, in the presence, the quiet silence, then that should not be strong enough to change the status. And the Gemara's answer is, everything is in everybody's presence. Word gets around, and even if you're not there. So now, of course, say that by the ox as well. Okay, but the ox requires a formal process of testifying in court, and you don't testify with somebody, in their absence, because that's the nature of that formal process. That's the force of the pasuk. Right. So exactly, that's a court process. This is not a court process. How does the mecha work? What do you mean? So the mecha, you need witnesses. It's true, but it's not a court process.
So you need to do it in front of.
Well, Rashi takes a little different approach, but it's predicated on the idea that this is really about the star,
right?
The proof, right? And Rashi says that the claimant says, if I had known that you were going to protest,
right, I would have held on to my star. So Rashi is already trying to introduce the more logical explanation and the less formal one that we're going to get to. That it's all about I wasn't bothering with my star because you weren't. But I'm trying to avoid that because I don't think it's shot at this stage in the Gemara. The Gemara really seems to take seriously this idea: you do something 3 times, it changes status. Right? So there has to be a meaning to the doing it 3 times. You have to frame it. You have to say, I'm the owner. You don't do it without a claim and so on. Okay, let's keep on going. Eventually, we're going to get to what I would consider the more logical explanation, but I want to treat this Gemara like give it its due. So let's keep on going. So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Meir the Amar Rizchik Nigichosav Chayiv Give Nigichosav Lokoshke. Now, the normal opinion is it has to gore 3 times on 3 separate days. I mean, once a day. But what if it goes 3 times on one day? So Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't become a shor hamuad. It's not habitual enough. It's like it's got something crazy. It had a bad day. But Rabbi Meir said, no, it's all the more dangerous. If you say when it's richek nigichosaf, if it's separated its gorings, it's chayav, then kirev nigichosaf, if it's scoring 3 times in one day, how much more so is this a dangerous, violent ox? So if that's true, you should say the same here. If you eat 3 times in a shorter period of time, all the more so is it a, if you want to say provocation, but we're not even dealing, all the more so does it establish you as the owner. You did something that demonstrated your possessing of it in the face of the owner, and that should be strong enough. So the Gemara says, let's say you ate from, 3 fruit on the same day to go, and maybe te'ena, like a te'ena. Now, the reason it says te'ena, Rashi says, is it didn't just say you took 3 apples off the tree. That would almost be like, obviously not distinct things. But what it means is they ripen in different times. So it could be that even in one day, one was ripe in the morning, and one in the afternoon, and one in the evening, and that's 3 separate eatings. Okay? So the Gemara says, why doesn't that work according to Rabbi Meir if we're making this real comparison to the ox? So the Gemara says they have a chazaka, do midashur muad. So the Gemara says no. Mashur muad beidna deislei haynegicha leisel haynegicha. When one goring is taking place, you don't have the existence of the other goring. Hachanami beidna deisel hayper leisel hayper. Here, the other fruit can't exist yet. So even though the other, fig is not yet ripe, it still is present. So it's not distinct enough from the first eating. So the Gemara says, fine. Achla klasa peri, the different question about the girsa, but anyway, our girsa is klasa yome. Let's say you had 3 fruit on 3 separate days where it really had not really, was really barely existed, on the prior. You go and slough, like slough. What is it? Slough is caper bush. Okay, so apparently caper bush, the berries are very tiny. So it's almost like when you ate one ripened berry one day, the other berries weren't really in existence. Now the Gemara is going to say they were tiny. They just weren't big yet. But anyway, the Gemara says they have a chazaka. Let that be a chazaka. So the Gemara says no. Hasan pera mia isa umin wahuda gamir va'azil. No. That still doesn't work. It's still not distinct enough because the fruits existed. They weren't finished, but they still existed all on the same day. Fine, says the Gemara. Let's say it was 3 different fruits on, over 30 days. You go on aspasta, like it's aspasta, which is like a fodder. So apparently you can cut it down and eat it, and then it'll grow back. So the Gemara, and so you can do that over 30 days. You can get 3. Cutting downs of the young shoots or whatever it is, and there really is something you fully cut down and then it grew back. Let that work. So the Gemara says, what would be the case? The kadich va'achla, you cut it down like you've quickly cut it and then you quickly cut it. You cut it down before it had fully grown. So the Gemara says, nah, that doesn't count. There you're just basically, like sneaking away and eating. So the way Rashi says is that it's not like
like some part is always there, right? It's just like some part is
but it had not. No, but it not fully. No, it's not what Rashi says. It's not fully grown. So when you're just hopping a quick, you're like not really eating a full fruit. You're just like quickly grabbing something as soon as it grows. That's not a full eating. So the Gemara says fine. So the Gemara says, Achot klasa peri beklasa yarchi. Fine. Let's do fine. We'll go up to 30. We'll go up to 3 months. You go on aspasta. It really does grow fully each month. So it fully grows in a month. You cut it down, you eat it. It fully grows another month. You cut it down, you eat it. So still, fine. The Gemara says, you should not need 3 years. If according to Reb Meir's logic that 3 times in a short period of time should work, I can get you 3 full eatings of 3 separate, growths in 3 months. Let that work. So the Gemara says, you know what? Maybe it does. Man Usha, Rabbi Yishmael. Yeah, who are these that come from Usha, that have this tradition from Usha? It's Rabbi Yishmael. The Rabbi Yishmael, Hachinami. Yeah, it would work according to Rabbi Yishmael. Did not. That's the end of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael, Omer, B'medram, B'stei Lavan. When is it that you need 3 years? When you're dealing with a wheat field, that it doesn't grow back right away. If you have some type of stuff that grows quickly, or that can produce 3 different types of harvests in a short period of time.
Yeah, but that's the actual fruit that he's talking about doesn't grow in a month.
Right, but the point still is, but let's just finish it. Kagon, Kana says to us, so Mesik at Tav, Kana says Kaitso, Arei will give a shanim. It works. So the point being, though, and this is the basic point of the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel really is saying you don't need 3 years. It's not about length of time. It's about units. You need 3 harvests. So Enochinami, that actually fits very well with the Shor Hamuad comparison. You need 3 acts of goring. You need 3 acts of, that can't be trivial, but it has to be 3 acts of harvesting in some type of produce. And that constitutes, even though it's not giving the guy a lot of an opportunity to respond, that is 3 separate acts that demonstrate distinct from one another, that demonstrate that you're the owner. Okay, so at this stage, the Gemara has not mentioned one word of lack of provocation is evidence that you must be the owner. It's all very formalistic. 3 things, okay, in a context where it's being framed by your making a claim, and that basically establishes you, presumably, like this said, you didn't legitimately buy it, but that act, the demonstration, the possession with that claim and the owner's silence, that gives meaning to that claim, that itself makes you the owner. That's the Shor HaMuad model. So now the Gemara says, the Rabbanan mind. Now, how about the rabbis who argue on Rabbi Yishmael? They obviously must have a different model for the idea of chazaka. Oh, it's already 8:30, so we will end here, and we will see what we sort of assume is the more rational model for Shor HaChazaka, the less formalistic one. We will begin with that tomorrow.